Hi there, this is Philip from Beyond the Tabletop. In this video I'm showing you how to convert Forgeworld's Marauder Bomber to the Marauder Destroyer. Now why would anyone do such a thing when both models still exist and are in production? It's all down to personal choice and aesthetics, but also it's a bit of a money saver. For a little bit extra cash you can get two planes in one. Now I'm doing this as a commission. Now the client, like myself, much prefers the design of the Marauder Bomber. It's just got a slightly nicer aesthetic to it that harks back to the B-52 bombers from World War II. There's just a few different design touches which make it look a bit better, such as the tail design and the wings. And also on a practical level, the bomber is slightly smaller, so it'll be much more easier to store and transport. In terms of the weapon loadout for the Marauder Bomber, it's got a set of twin las cannons for the front gun mount. Then in the middle top turret it's got a set of twin heavy bolters, and lastly it's got another set of twin heavy bolters at the tail. And just here are the three guns. It also comes armed with a set of bombs, but those aren't visible on the model. Now the Marauder Destroyer is slightly different and has got a much more potent set of weapons. On the front section of the plane it's got three sets of twin autocannons. In the middle top turret it's got the exact same loadout as the bomber, which is twin heavy bolters, and on the tail, instead of the twin heavy bolters, it's got twin assault cannons. It also comes equipped with some bombs, but again those aren't modelled. It can optionally also take 8 Hellstrike missiles. Now the models for the Hellstrike missiles are out of production sadly, but you might be able to pick them up on eBay. The Marauder Bomber does have wing hardpoints, so you can actually add those missiles on exactly in the same way with the Marauder Destroyer if you had them. In this instance, however, we're not adding in those missiles, we're just adding in the main guns. So to do this conversion in the most economical way possible, I picked up a set of the Horus Heresy Cataphractae Elastus pattern assault cannons, which you get 2 of, which are here. And then when it comes to the autocannons, I picked up 3 of the Contemptor pattern autocannons because they are twin autocannons already, which exactly serves the purpose that I need for this project. Let's talk about the assault cannons because this was the easiest conversion. This is the finished assault cannon that I've completed, which is also magnetized. If I compare it to the original model on the left, you can see where I've cut off the arm, so literally just along here, which gives you a standalone assault cannon. There's only a tiny bit of cleanup work. After making that cut, you had quite a bit of bare detail just here, so I used some evergreen strips of plasticard just to add in some extra detail. Now this is the pack of evergreen strips that I used. They are the 0.25 by 0.5mm strips. They come in really long packets and they're just really handy for adding in some extra detail. Then it was just a matter of adding in some 4mm magnets by just drilling them out and mounting them. If we just look at the hardpoint they're going to be mounted to, you can see that they will snap in quite easily. In terms of magnetizing the original weapons, what we need to do is cut off these notches. But before we cut off that notch, what I've done is I've created a small pilot hole with my pin vise, and what I've tried to do is keep that hole as central as possible. So I can now cut this off. And then we've still got that hole, so I can now drill that out much bigger. So what I've now got is a 4mm drill bit. Now I've got a much bigger pin vise here for the 4mm drill bit, so I can now just drill that out. And we just need to go a few millimeters down because all we're going to use is 2 1mm magnets. So just line it up centrally. And in terms of the depth, I think that's more than enough. It's always better to go slightly deeper because you can push it in without it going in too far. But what you don't want is there to be a little lip where the magnet is, because then this won't sit flush with the weapon mount. I've got my one that I've done already here and a stack of magnets. So I just keep the stack of magnets attached to this just so I know that the polarity is correct for when I'm adding in the next one. So it's always good just to do a little dry fit. And as I know this is going to be a pretty tight squeeze, I don't want to push it all the way in because it might get stuck. So I'm just going to go straight ahead with adding in the glue. So I've got my Gorilla Glue here, so I just need to put a small amount in. So then it's just a matter of adding in those magnets. and you just want to slide it away, and then with that magnet ever so slightly recessed, we can just push down on the mat just to make sure it's flush, and there you can see that it's now all flush. So with that one done, you can see how it compares with the original. They're both nice and flush, so we should be able just to add this into our weapon mounts. So here's the one that I've already got magnetized, so I can add in the las cannons, and you can see that they are reasonably parallel to each other, because that's the important thing at this stage, because you don't want them to look wonky. So this seat has been complete already, so this could be for the rear or the front gun. Now I just need to do the exact same thing for the other one. So how did I go about it? It was relatively straightforward, because the holes are already 4mm across. All I did is I've just drilled them out ever so slightly using my 4mm drill bit, just to make sure they go down a bit further, and then it will just be a matter of adding in some glue and dropping in a stack of magnets. Now when it comes to adding in magnets, I like to do stacks. I'm going to try and put in about 3 magnets in each one, just so they're extra strong to hold the weight of those guns. So I'm going to put a fair bit of glue in this one, and then just move it around just to make sure that it's nicely covered. Then I can take my stack of magnets. When it comes to checking the polarity, you can either use this one that I've already created just to check, or you can use it against that las cannon that we've already done. So now this is stuck in, I know which way around it needs to go. So I want to go about 3 deep, and then I just want to make sure that that's reasonably flat and flush against the finish, which it is. And then I can just add in some glue to this side and repeat the process. So again, just adding in about 3 magnets, then just pushing them lightly in with my finger to make sure they're flush. Now I can just use a tissue to wipe off any excess super glue, and then just double check that they're still nice and flush and not sticking out. So I can just push it in ever so slightly with my nails if needed. There, I think that's much better. We need to make sure that the glue has set, so I'll put that aside for a few minutes before trying to mount the guns on, just to see how everything fits together. In the meantime, while that dries, I can show you how I went about creating my first set of twin autocannons. Now these ones are designed to mount onto the front gun, so these ones will be mounting using the same method as those las cannons, so they will be mounting in here. I've already completed this one and I've magnetized them, so you can see that they will fit in just like this. Now, to give you a bit more context, what I'll do is I'll build this out in the actual turret, just so you can see how it all fits together. So we've got the rear part, which we can just drop in, and then we've got that frame, which creates the front. Then we can just add in these 2 guns. So you can see how the guns fit together, and you've got this nice little side mounting detail which marries up with the front of cockpit, which I really like. For me personally, I quite like the external ammo clips, although I can understand that it might not be for everyone, and in fact the client doesn't particularly like that design, so I will be cutting these clips off just along those angled lines, but I thought I would show it to you in this form just in case you're a fan of it and wanted to replicate it yourselves. To show you how I went about creating this design, I took the Contemptor autocannon guns, and then using my GW X-Acto saw, I just cut along this line here just to take out those back elements. Then I also cut down just along here, and then again along here, basically cutting into that top targeter, but just being very careful not to damage these heat coils just here, because that's detail that we want to keep. So that allowed me to split it out, and then of course I could just magnetize the back in the exact same way as I've done with the las cannons. And then in terms of these heat coils, you can see they're perfectly fine on this side, and on this side you can see the coils. I had to sort of do a little fix on them because they were quite a solid block where it joined with that targeter. So what I did is I ran my X-Acto blade carefully down and along, just to help kind of create and define those coils, and then just tidying it all up with a blade and smoothing these bits down. And now with the clip I can just take that off with my blade as well. So I can just go in with my saw So I've now taken that off, and then just with a knife I'm just going to take off that little notch just there. With the clip now removed, I'm just going to do the exact same on the other one, and then we can see how it looks on the final turret. So without the ammo clips on, it does still look really good. So that's the completed front turret with those first set of twin autocannons. Now, as you might be thinking, the Marauder Destroyer has 3 sets of twin autocannons, so what are we going to do with those other 2 sets? The last step in creating the Marauder Destroyer is to add in 2 extra sets of autocannons, because we've already done the first set that goes on the front. So what I've done is taken inspiration from Lockheed's AC-130 plane, which has a couple of side mounted guns. So just to give you a rough idea of where this is going, this is just going to be mounted where those doors go. So it should look something like that once it's finished. In terms of how I've created this, I've taken one of the twin autocannon guns from the Contemptor, and I cut it just along here, making sure to keep that rivet detail because that's quite important. And then I took some spare tubing that I then cut to size, just using a set square to try and cut it as vertically as possible. As you can see there, I needed to cut a very thin slice, and then also carefully sanding it down to be as smooth as possible. The tubing itself is 2 centimeters wide and 2 millimeters thick. And then in terms of the depth that I've cut it to, it's around 1 millimeter. It was probably a little bit more than that, but I just made sure I sanded it back to be as thin as possible. Then I added on the rivet detail. The rivets are 0.8 millimeters in size. Now you can either get some rod and cut it thinly to create those rivets. However, I used something called RP Tools Rivet Maker. Now it's quite expensive, but it does allow you to create a bunch of different rivets to various sizes. With that done, I then just backed the disc with some very thin plasticard, which then just allowed me to add on the green stuff. I built it up into a rough mound, which I could then pin the autocannons into. I've moulded the green stuff like it's a fabric cover for the gun mount, which will give it the flexibility to move around left to right. Now I've done that with one of them so far. This one is to go on the left hand side of the bomber, so is it pointing slightly forwards and out to the left, whereas the other one will be mirrored to point down and towards the right because it is going on the right hand side of the bomber. In terms of cutting this Contemptor gun, it's best to just rest your blade along this little lip here and here, because then that will give you the perfect cut to ensure that you keep this detail just here with the rivets on. So you can see where I've just started to make that cut, and I'll finish that off camera. That's now being cut away and cleaned up, so for now we can just put this to one side and work on the mounting. So I've pre-cut this from my piece of tubing. As I mentioned before, it's 2 centimeters across and 2 millimeters thick, and it is 1 millimeter deep. So it's quite a small detailed piece. The next step is to add on all the rivet detail. To set this up for adding in the rivets, I've used an old cutting mat which has got this circular design on, as well as a crosshair. I've folded over and effectively double-sided my Tamiya tape, added that in, then using a pen and ruler I've managed to add in a crosshair design which just allows me to position my ring as centrally as possible. I've then got my 8 rivets here, which I also need. Now the rivets are 0.8 millimeters in diameter and about 0.5 millimeters thick. So I've used the RP Tools punch and die set. To give you a quick demonstration, you just slot in this piece of plastic into whichever hole measurement you want. So I want to use 0.8. Then you use the corresponding punch, which here is 0.8. Just add that into the hole. And then using this little hammer, just hammer down, remove this, Remove your piece of plastic, although you are meant to tighten these in. I found if you have it ever so slightly loose, you can just simply wiggle your plastic around and hammer out a few more rivets quite quickly without having to unwind and then move this around. Now if we look just underneath, it's now pops out of a hole, which if I show you with my knife is now perfectly flat, as well as being perfectly circular. So the benefit of using this punch and die method is that you're always going to get really nice consistent thicknesses, whereas if you were to take some plastic rod and try to thinly slice up these little discs for your rivets, you'll quite often find they'll be inconsistent. So next up is adding in the rivets. What I want to do is just carefully take one of these off. So using the tip of a blade you can pick it up and sort of hold it in place. Then using some extra thin Tamiya cement we can apply it while holding it in place, and there we go. It might look slightly off the line to you because the camera isn't exactly lined up 100%. So next up we're going to add in rivets here, here and here, which I'll just do off camera. With those rivets now glued in place, it's now just a matter of turning this ring 45 degrees. So with that turned 45 degrees, the top and bottom two rivets should form a nice parallel line to each other, as well as this centre line, and each of the four inner quadrants should be the exact same size. With that all now set up, we've now got some new markings for where to place the next set of rivets. So we just need to repeat that process again. And you can see how it now looks all completed. With the tape removed, we've now got our completed riveted disc. The rivets are in a pretty accurate place considering the method is relatively quick and easy to do. It's definitely slightly better than just trying to do it by eye. With that done, we can just put that aside for one moment. Next up we need a very thin sheet of plasticard. It's probably around 0.25 of a millimeter. It needs to be really thin because we just need to create a backing plate for this disc without really adding in extra depth. So you could just trace around this with a pencil to mark out how big it needs to be. Instead I'm going to place it just off of the corners and sort of mark out roughly the edges along with what I believe to be the center. And now I can use my compass cutter to create a nice circle. So I've done lots of very light scores, making sure not to go all the way through, and all I can do is just bend it and that will pop the plastic out. Then I can just check that I've got the right size. And as you can see, I've cut it out too big, but that's fine. So with that rough cutout done, I can then place it on that central line. Do a cleaner cut this time. So again, it was a little rough in places, but I think that is more than enough for what I need. Let's just knock this hole back down a little bit more with my fingers. So that now looks like a really good fit. So what I'm going to do is just go back in with my glue and just apply it just to those edges. Now when I'm doing all of this work, I'm trying to make sure I don't put any pressure down on those rivets because they are quite delicate and will easily come off. And then just to make sure that nothing's stuck down to the bottom. So as that is gluing, I can just flip it around so we can see what the back looks like, which is a little bit messy, but that's fine because it's not a detail that you're going to see. So I just want to make sure that that plastic sets in and hopefully the two components stick well together. So I'm just going to leave that for a few minutes until it's fully dried. With that now dry, the next step is just to take your gun and use it as a guide for where we want to position it. I always suggest having one of the rivets facing upwards so you basically get all the compass points. Now if I bring in the one that I've completed, you can see that it is pointing downwards and to the left. So we want to mirror image this on our other one, so it will be pointing downwards and to the right. So what we now need to do is just take some green stuff and slowly build up that inner area to create a small mound. Now it doesn't need to be too accurate at this stage, because you just need to form the structure in which you can pin your autocannon into, and from there we can build up all of that fabric detail. So off camera I'll just add in that green stuff. I've added some green stuff onto this disc. If we just take a look up close, when it came to adding the green stuff, I made a very small mark which you can still see just here below this top rivet, and that was effectively to align it to north, so I would always know when I'm picking up and adding on the green stuff which way round this would be. It won't matter too much once the autocannons are in, because that will give me my alignment that I need. Until then, that's quite a useful thing just to get my bearings. As you can see, the mound isn't too high and it's pretty comparable to the one on the left. You can also see where I gently pressed in the rear of the autocannon guns just to create a mark of where those guns are going to be mounted, which just gives me a sense of where everything needs to go before I pin the autocannon in place. And if I just hold that autocannon in place, you'll get a sense of the symmetry of the two pieces. So the next step is to pin the autocannon in place. What I'm going to do is just drill out some holes and drop in some spare pin so the pin is protruding, which will allow me to add it onto this rear section. I'm now all ready to pin the autocannon. I've drilled those two holes. They're 1.5 millimeters in diameter, and then I've got two lots of pins. The first one, that is the final pins that we're going to use, is about 12 millimeters, and the much smaller ones, which we're just going to use to help create a guide, is 8 millimeters in length. So let's just grab these small ones first of all. I've dropped in the short pins, and as you can see they just protrude out ever so slightly. Those shorter pin pieces just allow me to line up that autocannon a little bit easier than if it was much longer. So I can just check that the alignment's all correct with how I want the final piece, and then I can just push the piece into the green stuff. That now just provides me with an indentation that allows me to drill the holes out a little bit more. I can now switch over the pins for the much longer ones, and then I can continue pushing in those pins into the green stuff. Now, after a little bit of trial and error, I've managed to line it up in a way that I'm happy. As you can see from this angle, it looks relatively symmetrical, and from this angle you can see how much of the pin is still showing. That's because I want to make sure that the gun is as far out as it is on the one on the left, just so nothing is too misaligned. And I can just show you from all the other angles. So this is from the right hand side, the left hand side, underneath, and again from the top. Now all I need to do is carefully remove the gun, leaving those pins in place. Next I just need to glue those pins as well as gluing in the autocannon. With that now all glued and dried in place, I can now carry on and complete the canvas hood that's made out of green stuff. So I just need to build up the structure a little bit more, just joining it up with the autocannons, and then create the necessary canvas effect for the ripples. So you can see what I've done on the one that's on the left, and you can see how I've tried to wrinkle it in some appropriate places, create some extra depth so it looks like the autocannons carrying on behind the hood and raising it up just on that sort of top part. And then underneath I've created more of the folds on the left hand side because that's where it's being compressed, and I've done less folds on the right hand side because that's where the canvas is stretching. Essentially I just need to now mirror that effect with this one. It's definitely worth taking your time with this and slowly building up the green stuff in multiple layers, again creating that initial structure and making sure it's fully cured before then layering on any extra detail that you might need to. With that all said, I'll now go away off camera and finish it off. I've now gone away and completed the green stuffing of this gun, so you can see how it looks here, where I've done some more folds on the right hand side because that's the direction the gun is going into. And while I've still done some folds to the top and the bottom, I've tried to keep it a bit smoother on the left hand side to show that the fabric is slightly tighter. Now I'm no expert when it comes to green stuffing, so it could probably be done better by someone a bit more skilled, but considering the limited experience of green stuff sculpting that I have, I think I've done a pretty good job. If I bring in the other one for a second, you can see how the two compare. They're not quite exactly mirrored, but they are pretty close. So you can see how it works on the sides, underneath, and from the top. So the next step is to work out how to mount them to the plane. I decided to magnetize them so they could be removed. That way the converted destroyer could always be reverted back to the Marauder Bomber if needed. The guns can be mounted in two positions. The first one is with both guns at the front, pretty much where those doors used to be, and then the second version is with one at the front and then one mounted at the rear. As you can see, I've already completed the mountings that I need. For the front mountings, I didn't add on the door because that's no longer needed. There were also a couple of hinges for that door that I removed. Then I just added on two pieces of plasticard that were the same thickness so I could get a nice smooth finish. On the back side of the plasticard there's an 8mm magnet glued in place and secured with some green stuff. I made sure to add that magnet and green stuff on first before gluing the plasticard in place. With the plasticard glued in place, there was quite an ugly seam line going all the way around, so I filled that in initially with a bit of green stuff and then to finish off using some Tamiya putty. Now the Tamiya putty is really good for sanding, so you get quite a good finish. So I sanded it all down smooth. Now while it might look quite ugly, it is actually quite smooth to the touch, so once it's all painted it should look quite seamless. To add in some additional detail, I scored in a panel line using the back of my knife, and in terms of the magnet that I've used on this gun, it's a 4mm magnet that I carefully drilled into the green stuff. Now I used a single large magnet here because it just makes the mounting a lot less complicated. You can add in the gun and you can just adjust it round to the right position. Ideally you want the rivets closely lined up with that panel line along with the top rivet facing to the top. If we flip it over to the other side, you can see I've done a very similar setup, and again the gun can just be added on because of the magnets. Now this gun uses a slightly different magnet setup because I also needed to do an option where the gun can be added to the tail. For the tail mounting, I didn't want to use just one magnet as this would have damaged the cross-section detail we have here. Instead I made two holes either side. The blue colour that you can see on the magnet is actually how I made sure that the magnets lined up with the holes that I was going to drill. So I just needed to apply a small amount of paint to the magnets, which I could then press down, and once I removed I was left with two small marks which gave me a guide for drilling the holes. So with those two guns complete, let's put it all together and see what we've got. So I'm just doing a dry fit of all the key components. So this is what the original Marauder Bomber looks like. The only key difference with this version is we're now missing those doors. So the front gun has those twin las cannons. The middle one, which will remain unchanged, has the twin heavy bolters. And then at the back we've got another set of those twin heavy bolters. So let's just swap these out. So we've got those autocannons, which should just snap in place. Then we've got those two side autocannons, one going there, then the other one just going on the right. So this should hopefully give you a good idea of what it will look like from the front. And then on the rear we can just take out those heavy bolters, and instead we can add in those assault cannons. And that's what it looks like up close. The size of the model makes it very difficult to fit it all in the frame, but I hope you can appreciate how it looks. And then the alternative setup is to take the gun from the front, and then we can just drop it into the tail. Hopefully this gives you a better idea of what it looks like, and then that's what it looks like from the tail. That's all for this video. I hope you've enjoyed this conversion project. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like and share it with your friends. To keep notified of future tutorial videos, make sure to subscribe and click the bell icon for notifications. And lastly, if you'd like to support this channel, then head over to Patreon, where you can help this channel grow for as little as $2 a month. Until the next time, take care.